Hey, welcome into Strictly Speaking. Good to have you aboard. Jim Simpson is our guest today. He's an investigative journalist. He's an author. He's a businessman, a former economist. In fact, a former economist and budget examiner for the White House Office of Management and Budget. How about that? Since 1995, he's been writing nonfiction articles for various periodicals based on both his experiences in government and business and a longstanding interest in public policy. He is the author of The Red Green Axis, Volumes 1 and 2. Must read if you really truly want to know the threats that this country may be facing. The Patriot's Handbook, a practical guide to restoring liberty. Who was Karl Marx? The Men, the Motives, and the Menace behind today's rampaging American left. And his latest that we're going to talk about today is Manufactured Crisis, the War to End America. Starting to sense a bit of a theme there. I am too. And if that last title sounds familiar, by the way, it may be because Jim is best known, perhaps, for his expose on the Cloward Piven strategy of manufactured crisis. His website is crisisnow.net, and we get to do a deep dive coming up here on that manufactured crisis today with Jim Simpson here on Strictly Speaking. Jim Simpson, so good to talk to you again. How are you, sir?
Hey, Bob. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, when are we going to talk about something fun? We got to get together and talk about something that isn't the end of the world as we know it.
This is really getting old, isn't it? It's really
Well,
getting old.
we're never going to get to that place where we can relax a little bit and talk about the joys of being in a glorious country and this fantastic republic that we were gifted and that
Right.
has been defended through the years. We're never going to get there if we don't talk about the attacks on that very thing, right? I mean, we have to identify the threats before we can defeat them, right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. We have to do that, and we have to do that at this point very fast and very, very aggressively. Yeah.
Jim, you and I have talked on a number of occasions about the red green axis on my radio program. Before we get into manufacturer crisis, give us a short primer on that. Let people know exactly what the red green axis is in a thumbnail sketch version of those two volumes.
Sure, sure. Well, it's a collaboration between the Reds, which are the communists, socialists, the left, the woke, if you will, and the Islamists, the radical Muslims who would like to see a caliphate throughout the world. And they have partnered in the United States and, in fact, all over the world, but you can see it today on college campuses and on the street everywhere where leftist kids, high college kids, are screaming, to obliterate Israel from the river to the sea, you know, and it's almost impossible to get my head around how they could be so ignorant and how, at the same time, they could be supporting, siding with, and championing terrorists. And I mean the worst kind of terrorists. Hamas, the Palestinian terrorist group, is a terrorist group. And frankly, every Palestinian in the uh, Gaza Strip is their prisoner. Really, their prisoner. They talk about Israel being a apartheid state. It is Gaza and the Hamas that have created an apartheid state. And it's a very, very destructive state as well because they, along with all the communists, socialists, believe in socialism. They use socialism, and it's a mess. And so my Red Green Axis, my two books were about how immigration brought those strategies to the United States, specifically in the refugee resettlement program and with all the vast illegal immigration that at the time was bad enough, but now has gone absolutely through the roof in terms of the people coming across the country. And it is a threat. My first book was said The Agenda to Erase America. The second book was subtitled An Existential Threat to America and the World. And that's what it is.
Well, yeah, we're going to tie this, I think, somewhat to the new book because
Sure.
in the new book, Manufactured Crisis, of course, you talk at length about what it's going to take to crumble America from within. We've always said that from the outside, no, no one is going to be powerful enough to do that. It will happen from within. But yet, the Islamists you're talking about in Gaza and what they like to call Palestine, the West Bank, the
Right.
communists in China, the communists in Russia, well, they're the outside. They're the ones that we're dealing with here.
Yeah, that's
What are they doing to get inside? That's the issue here. They're not attacking us from out there. They're infiltrating, as you just said, across our borders, sometimes coming here legally, but with nefarious purposes. And
true.
they are within. The reds and greens are both inside the country and operating with some, I don't know, dare I say, traitors who are inside the United States working in the government who don't necessarily believe in us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as I make the point in the book, you know, the Democratic Party is a wholly owned subsidiary of the radical left today. They are fully owned, and many are communists. As you know, our mutual friend Trevor Loudon has talked about that and written books about it. There are at least 100 in the House of Representatives who are quasi socialists or communists, and there are a number of them in the US Senate. And in the 8 years of the Obama administration, there was a communist in the White House. And these are facts, whether people like to believe them or not. These are easily uh, discoverable facts for those who are willing to do a little research. The media will never talk about that, but it's the truth. And the same thing is true of Joe Biden. He has never been a moderate. He was elected with the strength of a group called the Council for a Livable World, which was started by a guy named Leo Szilard, who was a Manhattan Project scientist, and the Soviets called one of their best sources for information on the bomb. So he was a traitor, and he wanted to get people elected. He helped get Biden elected. He helped get Al Gore elected, and then they spent their entire careers fighting against any legislation that would oppose the Soviets' advance throughout the world. So they've never been moderates. And the same thing with Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris' parents both were Marxists, and she is surrounded by Marxists. Her husband works with the Communist Party of China. He has members of the Communist Party of China on his personal staff in his business. And so, and Kamala Harris has been working with those people for years. And the same thing can be said of Tim Walz, her vice presidential candidate nominee. He has gone to China. He went to China over the course of years, bringing young people from high school over to learn all about the wonderful things in China. He actually carried entire school classes over there to teach them about communist China. And it's very much like the Venceremos brigades in Cuba, where the cover reason was that the students could go over and learn about the wonderful Cuban Revolution and work in the cane fields, when in fact, the real purpose was to indoctrinate and recruit those students, which included Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn, later to become the Weather Underground, or were in fact a leather underground at that time, and recruit them to promote communism in the United States and to work hand in glove with the Cuban DGI, their intelligence service, which is what the Weather Underground through Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn did. They did that. So they are definitely traitors, and they should have been tried for treason long ago, and in my mind, put up against a wall and shot. But they got away scot free because even then, the political infrastructure and the judicial system were corrupt enough that they could get away with it.
Yeah, I talked to Trevor Loudon just a few weeks on this program where you are right now, and he has done such great work in exposing the communist upbringing,
Mhm.
education, ties. Everywhere Kamala Harris has gone, she has been aided by communists.
Yes.
And it's what's really amazing is I actually posted on my social media and in my Rumble channel a short clip of my interview with Trevor,
Mm.
in which he talks about that very thing about communist upbringing for Kamala Harris and so forth. and pointed out her new campaign slogan, or what has been adopted as their campaign slogan, which is "We're not going back, forward together." And I didn't know this until I read up a little bit more from Trevor, and you can probably speak to this.
Yeah.
Those are communist slogans and terms.
Yeah.
In fact, I looked, Jim, at the CPUSA website, the Communist Party USA, and there's featured 3 years ago in 2021 the transcript of a speech given by one of their leaders. Headline:
Yeah.
"We're not going back, forward together." Is
Well,
it just an accident that Kamala Harris picked that as her slogan?
well, you might add to the fact that the 2016 slogan and icon for the Hillary Clinton campaign was forward.
Yes. Well, and you know what else was? Uh,
Hmm.
Since you brought him up, and
Yeah.
I looked this up myself, 2012, Barack Obama used the forward word first.
Yeah.
And this is very, very, very influential in European communism.
Yeah.
And if people want to dig that up a little bit, look that up a little bit, look up the word forward and its impact in European communism, because it means moving forward past capitalism,
Right.
past the West, and into the full on communist goals and agenda that they have here.
Yeah.
Obama used it, Hillary used it, and now Kamala is using it. And some people aren't connecting those dots. They're not hard to follow.
No, they're not, but it requires you to actually get off your butt and do something. Requires you to
Well,
actually look. And people are afraid to look, frankly. People
Well,
don't.
well, yeah, because they're afraid of what they'll find. I mean, they just have it in their mind that they where they want to go and what they want to stop, which of course happens to be Donald Trump. And I don't give a rip about that at this moment, but they are so driven in their desire to stop him. They don't care if they actually side with the first person,
Yeah.
who is actually known ahead of time. People didn't know this about Obama. We do now through your work,
Yeah.
through Trevor's work and others about his communist upbringing
Yeah.
and so forth. But we know Kamala now, and
Mhm.
she was supposed to be the golden child, the next golden child of the communists and the Marxists
Yeah.
in 2020. In 2019, when she ran, she started with tens of millions of dollars and 20% support. She was, when she announced her candidacy, she was easily the number one contender. And over the next 11 months, people realized that she's just terrible, despite everything they lavished her with. So now handing her the reins without making her win a primary is the way that they can force their next communist golden child into the position of authority that they want. Is that overstated?
No, you can't fix stupid, but the communists figure out a way to get around it. They always figure a workaround.
Well said. Well said. Let's talk about Marxism too, because again, I'm actually trying to tie a little bit of your work in your previous books to
Sure.
Manufacturing Crisis, which we'll do
Yeah.
here, because your book on Karl Marx, you and I just mentioned Marxism. Give us your working definition, Jim, because a lot of people watching us right now hear the terms socialism, communism, Marxism, Maoism. What's the difference between all of these isms? They're very closely related, but can you give us something on that?
Well, just use the word communism to start with. And when you back off of that to like Maoism, for example, uh, versus Leninism or Marxism Leninism,
Right.
the difference between those is merely just tactics and strategies for achieving communism. And I go through this to a great extent in my Manufactured Crisis book. I go through the many mainline definitions that they have that you can get in the various dictionaries, and who all talk about some you know future utopia where everybody will have an equal share of everything and everything will be wonderful. But the communists themselves, starting with Lenin, said, no, 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 no. Communism is not a economic system. Communism is a body of strategies that allow communists to seize, hold, and keep power. That's what it is. And Lenin said it, and even Marx said it. And for example, before they wrote the Communist Manifesto, which is really what everybody gloms onto, and a lot of the the goals of the Communist Manifesto were actually achieved. Social Security is a goal of the Communist Manifesto, and a progressive income tax was a goal of the Communist Manifesto. And of course, those things are kind of camel's nose in the tent type of things, which sound good on the outset, but over time they expand and grow and metastasize like cancer until ultimately the country collapses. But it's a way for them to insinuate themselves into power in the meantime. But before the Communist Manifesto was written, um, Marx said, "We are not concerned with the situations of the day. What we are concerned with is a ruthless criticism of everything existing." And what he meant was everything existing in the West. And their goal was to ruthlessly criticize every aspect of Western society and culture until capitalism was utterly destroyed. And so while he made these flowery predictions in the Communist Manifesto, he never told really how communist government would work because he really didn't have any idea. But what he and all of his fellow communists kept talking about was destroying Western society. They wanted to utterly obliterate the West. And they wanted to take over, seize power, and hold that power and all the wealth that goes with it. So the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. That's what David Horowitz quoted another leftist student for a democratic society member as saying. And what he meant was they don't care about immigration. They don't care about civil rights. They don't care about abortion rights. They don't care about anything except insofar as it can help deliver them into a position of power. So all of those things are designed for them to insinuate themselves further and further into power and promote the most destructive agendas they can until Western society is utterly destroyed. And I mean, I could read to you what I read to you over the radio, what Lenin said about creating crisis, and when there wasn't one existing, pretended that it did exist, and or create new crises and keep building on those crises until ultimately the capitalist society is destroyed. And Willie Munzenberg, who was one of Lenin's inner circle in 1917 when the Soviets took over Russia, with Lenin as its first guide, guy named Willie Munzenberg said, "We must organize the intellectuals and use them to make Western civilization stink, because only then, when we have corrupted all its values and made life impossible, can we impose the dictatorship of the proletariat," which of course is the communism. And so that's what we've been witnessing all of this time, a deliberate strategy to corrupt our culture, corrupt our society. That's why I have a chapter in the new book called Strategic Corruption,
Mhm.
where they actually um, infiltrate the various, our financial sector, our political sector, and use those first to make themselves fabulously rich, but in the process, corrupt the entire system. And that's what they're doing. That's what they did with the subprime mortgage crisis. That's what they've done with so many things. That what happened started in the 90s, and Peter Schweizer wrote a book about it um, called The Architects of Ruin, in which he pointed to Bill Clinton and what was the name of his Treasury Secretary? It escapes me right at the moment. But all these people came from the financial sector. Clinton didn't, but the other people came from the financial sector, where they really worked hard to infiltrate and corrupt the financial sector. Now, why did they do that? Because, you know, none of Marx's predictions have come through. None of Marx's predictions that the capitalist society would collapse of its own weight, and that the people would revolt. None of that has come true. Capitalism has been the greatest engine for prosperity that's ever existed. And they know that. That's why they couldn't get the working class to do their revolution for them. So that had to go out the window. And Munzenberg said, "Oh, well, we got to organize the intellectuals," and um, and that is why they have corrupted the financial system, because now everybody believes the financial system is corrupt, and everybody believes the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, because right now actually that's what's happening. And why is it happening? It's because the left infiltrated the financial system and destroyed it. They're doing everything they can to corrupt it while making themselves fabulously wealthy. So we have guys like George Soros, who used insider trading to become the billionaire he is. He's not a smart man, he's a freaking moron, but he has all kinds of support from the communist movement, secret communist movement inside the financial sector, that can guide him on the best investments to make. And now that he's become a multi-billionaire, he can move markets. So there's people like that within the system, and so now they capitalist system is showing itself to be exactly what the communists said it would be, but it's because the communists have created that situation.
Um, Jim, when you talk about organizing the intellectuals, are we talking about organizing the intellectuals and the communist movement to do what they were going to do, or taking the American or the Western intellectuals and having them do their bidding? Because
Well,
that would explain the higher education system in this country and what has happened to it over the last several decades.
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. The uh, a French polemicist said that the West would die through, quote, a treason of the intellectuals. Think about that, treason of the intellectuals. And now, why did they pick on the intellectuals, Bill? Because the head of the German Communist Party said, as Willy Munzenberg knew, you don't have to pay the intellectuals to do your bidding. All you have to do is flatter them. And why is that? Because the quote unquote intellectuals, what's his name, uh, the black economist, my favorite guy.
Thomas Sowell?
Yeah,
Thomas
Thomas
Sowell?
Sowell said, the intellectual is a job title. It's not anything that really reflects what a person is. It's just their job title, and that's so true, because you have these people who are, in the media. They are in mostly in government and in universities, and they think, and high school for that matter, secondary school for that matter, they think they know better than everybody else. And so somebody comes along and tells them, "Oh, yes, you do. And we need your brilliant assistance in guiding our revolution." And they get all excited about it because now they've been flattered to do this thing, which sounds fun and dark and dangerous, but they're still safely ensconced in their, you know, tenured positions in universities or in the media, where the leadership has already been taken over by the communists. So they're in great shape. The mass culture will go right along with them, and they can promote all this stuff. And then as that happens, the actual real communists begin to infiltrate those institutions and start guiding it truly in the direction that they want it to go. And that started in the 1930s with, as you know, the Columbia Teachers College, where they imported communist professors from Frankfurt, Germany, who had been working at the Institute for Social Research, and that was founded under the guidance and orders of Lenin and Willy Meisenberg and Georgy Lukács, another notorious communist. And the goal was to use that, School for Social Research is kind of a bland name, uh, but they were all Marxist college professors, and their goal was to recruit students to become Marxists and indoctrinate them, and in the meantime, provide a cover for Soviet agents who wanted to work in Germany under their, as agents while pretending to be college professors. So when Hitler took over, they all came to the United States through the good offices of John Dewey, the then head of the National Education Association, and the guy who became known as the father of public education, who was an admirer of Soviet education, visited there many times and praised it, and Edward R. Murrow, who later became the anchor for CBS News. At that time, he headed an organization called the Institute for International Education, which relocated, professors out of Germany uh, when they had to leave. And so they were relocated at the Teachers College at Columbia University, and where they subsequently were able to indoctrinate something like 60% of the college professors and administrators that would later go on into all of the large institutions.
Yeah, because whoever would have predicted that the Frankfurt School would ultimately become every school USA? Other than those who were driving it with that agenda. This is, of course, the manufactured part of
Yeah.
manufactured crisis,
Yeah.
or a big portion of it. Jim, is it not just a straight up miracle from God that we have not collapsed already? When you take what you've just kind of articulated in the last 6 or 7 minutes, and you look at what they have done to the education system, and you look at the infiltration of the communists and all of the attacks on the West that you described. All Western civilization must go. From the nuclear family to the education system to private property, all of these things must go. This has been an onslaught for the last nine or almost a century, I guess,
Yep.
and we're still here. We're still
Yep.
standing. I don't
Yep.
know how. But
Yeah.
I do see a tipping point here. We may be about to cross that Rubicon, if you will, but it is almost a miracle that we're still here, faced with everything you just laid out.
Well, facts are a hard thing, as they say. Our form of government, our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, our amendments. These were all um, God inspired, and but they created uh, a free, pretty much an unprecedented free society where people were free to do what they wanted, to use their abilities to, pursue uh, property, pursue happiness, which is, physical property, and become wealthy. And that's, what we call the American dream. Well, that's hard to kill. And the fun thing about free markets is, every time the communists put up a roadblock, the markets find a way around them. And it frustrates the hell out of them, but that's what happens. And it will continue to happen as long as we have freedom of speech and freedom of action. And that's why they are trying to kill those things right now. Up until now, they have been, well, they're gradually more and more successful, but they have not completely managed to kill the fatted goose yet. But they're working, and they're plucking it apart feather by feather, and now we are, we're hanging by a thread, but we're still hanging because you and I can still speak about this. People can still learn about this. They've done everything they can to suppress the truth because they know the truth will kill them, and that's why they're trying to kill us, figuratively
And
and at
it's
some point literally.
it's working in some of the Western democracies that used to have free speech, maybe not in the same language that we have it in our First Amendment, but you see what's going on in the UK. You
Yeah,
see that they just arrested CEO of Telegram in France. You see what's going on in Germany. I mean, literally. And here, some of the leaders that you and I have been talking about in the last 6 months alone, we've heard separate statements from former Secretary of State and presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, current Democratic nominee Kamala Harris, and vice presidential nominee Tim Walz, separate statements about how people cannot be allowed to say what they want if it's disinformation as determined by government,
yeah,
if it's disinformation or if it's hate speech. They're talking about not just civil fines, but jail time. I mean, they're literally so when we talk about the true foundation of Western civilization and of the American culture, our freedom to say what we want to say, including against an overbearing government. This is exactly what's in their scope right now. They're targeting that.
oh yeah, no, they absolutely are. And they talk about misinformation, disinformation, and now a new word, malinformation. If it's bad information, even if it's true, and and it might lead people to do, to take untoward action, like if we say the election was stolen, which the election was definitely stolen in 2020, and I would argue to a large extent in 2022, and they're going to try again in 2024. And I go through that at great depth in the book in my chapter titled That All Cheaters Might Vote. And um, they say malinformation is anybody spreading the word that, oh, the election was stolen and it couldn't possibly have happened because we've had the freest, fairest elections in history. And so people who say that are a threat to democracy. And they have to be arrested and jailed, and that's the kind of stuff because they are terrified of people finding out the truth of what they've been up to. Because if they did not have the mainstream media to shield them every step of the way, uh, they couldn't get elected dog catcher.
Yeah. I don't want to go too far backwards into 2020, other than the fact that if they don't get it figured out what was done, for example, how in the state of Pennsylvania at 2 a.m., Donald Trump, everybody went to bed with Donald Trump up by 25,000 votes and going to win Pennsylvania by 8 a.m. after everybody was sleeping. Joe Biden had 42,000 more. So there was a net 70,000 vote gain for Joe Biden in the course of 6 hours, which is just not possible. I don't want to go too far into that, but what I do want to do is talk about the Cloward Piven strategy of this manufactured crisis. Everything that you talk about, you've of course exposed in great detail. A lot of people watching you and me right now don't know who Cloward and Piven are or what that strategy entails. Can you give us that?
Yeah, sure. Well, they were like so many radicals in the 60s, putting out a lot of information. And in 1966, they wrote an article for The Nation magazine called The Weight of the Poor Strategy to End Poverty. And in that article, they outlined this strategy where Lyndon Johnson had just passed the Great Society program. And so that was a huge expansion of welfare. And they said if everybody eligible for welfare were enrolled in every single welfare program available, the government would collapse of its own weight because it couldn't keep its promises. It couldn't make, it couldn't provide all of that, all of those benefits. And when those people were denied benefits or when the entire government collapsed, there would be rioting in the streets. Um, and in that process, the hardcore left, the communists, the socialists, whatever you want to call them, would propose uh, creating an entirely new system based on a guaranteed annual income. And that guaranteed annual income, it's interesting, it was between $5,000 and $10,000 a year which in today's dollars is between 40 and $80,000 a year. So we're talking a average income for the average American for doing nothing. So why work? And then they said that this would replace all of the current um, benefits. But as you know as well as I do, once something has been instituted by government, it never goes away. So subsequent articles have proven that in the little pilot programs that they've tried this, they never talk about getting rid of others. This is an add-on. And now, first you have to ask yourself, well, if the government couldn't afford um, the amount of welfare that was currently being paid out, how could it possibly afford a 40 to $80,000 income for every American? And of course it couldn't. So the whole thing is a lie. The whole thing is designed to utterly collapse our system. It's to destroy our system. So even their solution, which they have, oh, wouldn't that be nice? If I didn't have to work and I could earn 50 or $60,000 just by sitting around, hey, I'll take it. You know,
But you know what nobody ever addresses whenever I hear people talk about this part of it
yeah,
is what good would your 40 to $80,000 do? What are
yeah,
you going to do with your money?
yeah,
Oh, I think I'm going to go to the movies. Well, who's going to be selling you the ticket?
yeah,
Because nobody's going to be working. Well, I'm going to go out to eat at a nice restaurant. Who's waiting that
yeah,
table?
yeah, right.
If everybody is being given free money, who's going to leave their
Don't
house
work,
to go and serve other people?
don't work.
Manufacture. I'm going to go buy myself a boat. Who's
Yeah.
going to be building boats if the government's giving them money to do nothing? I mean, it just makes no sense at all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When you even just think about it critically for a couple of minutes, you realize the whole thing is a joke. It's a fraud, but it's designed to overwhelm the government with with problems that it can't solve. And so that's where they started, but they didn't end there. They went on by
They're
spending
still there too, aren't they? I apologize. They're still there too, aren't they? I keep it now. It's called UBI, right? Universal Basic Income is the new terminology for
yes,
it.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, and it has been um, it has gotten into the leftist jargon narrative thought to the point where Biden's, I think, Inflation Reduction Act and his earlier big spending bill both had proposals for
Yes,
universal basic income. They were taken out by the Senate or the House, I forget, but they they
it
were
just fits right in with Medicare for all, and for basically all things for all people at the government's discretion on how to dole it out. But essentially, you don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm sorry. Continue though.
yeah, no. So it has entered the mainstream of ideas among the left, and it is actually being tried in pilot programs in various cities around the country. And you're going to run into the same problems, and they're all Democratic cities, and we all know what's happening to all the Democratic cities. They're falling apart. People are flooding out of them, and those that are staying are faced with crime, inflation, high taxes, and uh, no work. And so it's evidence right in front of your eyes. How could anybody before this? But people tend not to think critically. They don't go any further than, oh, this is a great idea. Oh, it's compassion for the poor. Yeah. And that's where they leave it. And so, but Cloward and Piven didn't stop there. Cloward died in 2001. Piven's still alive and she's still babbling about the revolution and are into her 90s. But their next target was the voting system, and they studied voting for 10 years. And then in 1993, they wrote and Bill Clinton passed the National Voter Registration Act. And the goal of that was to elections, nationalize elections, and make them make the government essentially a voter registration program for prospective Democrat voters. And that's why they have motor. It's called Motor Voter. So you can
Yep.
get your registration at your motor vehicles office. You can get it at welfare offices, libraries, all over the place, and they are aggressively pushed that, making essentially all of these government agencies into voter registration and then subsequently get out the vote efforts for Democrats. I mean,
You
it's
know
a
what the latest one is? You know what the latest place to get yourself registered?
go.
Hospitals.
Oh yeah,
Hospitals and health clinics. People are going in there to get this fixed or that fixed or whatever. Then you sign here for your treatment. And by the way, sign here to register to vote. I mean, they're not checking citizenship. They're
right.
not
No, no,
checking voting, you know,
right.
identification or anything of that nature. So they don't even know if they are legal to be registered, but they're registering them anyway, saying, if this person isn't allowed to, they'll catch it on the back end. And of
Right.
course, they
That's
never do.
a lie. No, that's a lie. And in fact, in many places, they are overtly registering illegals to vote, and
Yes.
uh, and they've even said it in some places. They think, oh, well, this is unfair that they can't vote here. It's crazy, but that's their game, and that was created by Cloward and Piven. And the second part of that motor voter registration, motor voter law, was it Section 8 had a provision for cleaning voter rolls, but it actually makes cleaning voter rolls much more difficult and time consuming. And so, in fact, while it purported to have that solution written into the bill, it was a solution that created a bigger problem because now we have voter rolls that are much dirtier than they used to be. Millions of dead people on our voter rolls, millions of people who are, have moved or no longer uh, live in the country, so many different things. And uh, it's very difficult using the motor voter law to get people to get the voter rolls cleaned. And so that's a real problem. And they knew that. They spent 10 years studying the voting system. And the goal was like it is with every leftist thing. Well, poor people can't do this for themselves. They can't register themselves, just like they can't eat, they can't vote, they can't go to the store, they can't do anything without help from the government. They need welfare, they need all this stuff. So, of course, they need to be uh, made voter registration very easy. The government took over that job where it's no longer an individual responsibility. Now it's the government's responsibility. And that's the pretext. But the real goal was to make cheating in elections much easier and to make it much more difficult to clean the voter rolls. So it was a second form of the Cloward Piven strategy to overwhelm the government with problems, this time in the voting system. And then we can take it further from there. We go to illegal immigration. Now, that is the Cloward Piven strategy on steroids, where millions upon millions of people are crossing our borders and flooding our cities and towns and creating innumerable problems. But those problems even existed when we had the legal immigration system. Most people think that, well, we had 1 million legal immigrants every year since the 80s or earlier, and we need those people for jobs. Well, the average number of people who took advantage of legal immigration in the United States for jobs was 15% of the total. So we could do well with 150,000 a year or 200,000 a year to handle the demand from job from companies who needed workers. You don't need 1 million people. And all the other people were coming in from all over the world, mostly chain migration. And uh, very importantly, the only communist China has been bringing in 70,000 people a year for decades. The only country that's allowed more is Mexico. And so we've been bringing in 70,000 communist Chinese every year. And those people may well want to be here. I'm sure they probably do. But you have to recognize that every single one of them are either a deliberate agent or a potential agent for the Communist Party because their family back at home uh, is essentially hostages. They're essentially hostages. If the communist somebody from the consulate comes to you and says, "Well, I want you to do this tomorrow in your job," and you say no, they say, "Well, don't forget, your mother and father, your grandmother, your grandfather, your brother, and your sister are all back in China, and we right now actually we have a shortage of livers." you know, so
That sounds insane. It sounds
you
insane, but I know it happens because these people have no regard for human life whatsoever. And to the point you're making about, they're going to do what they're told while they're here.
yeah,
We have to tie that in, do we not, to the thousands and thousands, or is it millions of acres of farmland that have been bought up by the Chinese, particularly those lands near the military installations and energy sites and so forth. I don't know what's coming, but I do know that if China owns a whole bunch of American land, which I'll never understand how that's something we accept or allow, but if China owns a bunch of American land and they're importing tens and hundreds of thousands of Chinese nationals here, it's not just to enjoy American cuisine. They're here for a purpose. I
yeah.
just don't know what it is yet.
Well, absolutely, and especially, we've talked about the approximately 30,000 or more military-aged communist Chinese men who have come in through the southern border, and everybody asks, well, where could those people have gone? And my guess, if we were to uh, actually take a canvas, we'd find out that a lot of them had gone straight to those properties that are owned by the Communist Chinese, where they can safely train for whatever future activity they intend to orchestrate against us.
I can't even imagine, again, how we would allow such a thing because can you imagine? Maybe I don't get it. Maybe can an American buy property, large swaths of Chinese land, and then move a bunch of Americans into it, and allow them to train, perhaps
Yeah,
with
right.
military exercise? I mean, look, everybody knows this is not a secret that we are geopolitical enemies with
Yeah.
that country. In fact, they're the most grave threat in the world that we have because of their resources, because of their size, their manpower, and so on and so forth. How in the world? I mean, is it always been American policy that we can sell private land to foreign companies or foreign countries?
No, I don't. No, it hasn't. And really, over the last 20 years, I think, well, ever since we really opened the door to Chinese business, that's where the problem started. But, as more and more companies took their business to China, it became more of a quasi-friendly relationship. And I think a lot of
Did that
politicians,
start just after the Cold War? When
yes,
when is that
yeah,
about when it
yeah,
began?
not a band, yeah. And many politicians on both sides of the aisle, unfortunately, thought, oh, well, they've become our friends, they're going to be on our side. And of course, that was Nixon's belief back in the 70s that there was a Sino Soviet split, which was a fake out. It wasn't a real split, it was a fake out to delude us into believing that one side or the other would side with us against another communist country. And if you understand anything about communism, you know that's just a ridiculous, ridiculous idea because the communists' number one goal is to destroy capitalism. And we are the number one country standing in the way of them doing that. So that whole thing was a fraud, but we believed it. And as we brought more and more of our business overseas, and we got cheaper and cheaper goods, we had this huge boom. Walmart went through the roof, and all these companies that were now able to provide their goods at a uh, uh, much cheaper because they were basically using Chinese slave labor to produce the goods. we gave the Chinese, we gave them manufacturing techniques which they didn't have. They didn't know how to do assembly lines. They didn't, neither did the Soviets. Soviets used to steal assembly lines from us and sneak them into the Soviet Union so that they would know how to make assembly lines. Same thing with the Chinese. They didn't have distribution networks. They didn't have marketing. They didn't have products. We gave them all that stuff, all of it, in return for cheaper labor. And what has that done? That has served to enrich China like it never has been, and make them, give them the resources to build a very, very powerful military, which they fully intend to use against us once they figure the time is ripe. And the time is getting close to being right. But yeah, so, but a lot of people thought, oh, well, it's just fine. The communists, they may be our adversaries, but come on, they're more interested in making money than they are in defeating us. How is that? That's ridiculous. The whole idea that, as Deng Xiaoping, the former premier, said, we want to control capitalism, not to destroy it. And why would they want that? Well, they want it for exactly what they've gotten, all the money that it can provide to them, and then the ability to build very, very sophisticated weapon systems with the help, by the way, I would add, of the Democratic Party under Bill Clinton, who gave the communist Chinese missile miniaturization technology, among other things, which in my regard is, in my belief, is a treasonous act. He never got called on the carpet for that. Everybody got distracted by Monica Lewinsky and stains on the dress. It was ridiculous. But um, uh, where was I going with that?
Well, I'm going
So,
to jump in.
oh no, so let me just say,
Okay, go ahead.
so we have today a bunch of a political class that essentially thinks, well, they're our adversaries, but we really can't mess things too up. We have too much to lose. And one of them is the State Legislative Leadership Council. And that is a group of state legislators who have um, colluded with the communist Chinese, and I believe they have enabled, they are one of the groups that have enabled the communist Chinese to do things like buy land in specific
Right.
states.
Yeah, it's a pretty astounding thing when you think about all of those threats from the outside could not possibly have an impact inside without cooperation and assistance. This
Right.
manufacture from again American traders. I've got time for probably about two more questions. One is going back to where we started our conversation about the red green axis. What is the likelihood, even though most of us agree that the threat to the United States and to our infrastructure literally comes from within our own infrastructure, if there is to be an attack from the outside, what is the likelihood, Jim, that our four most grave enemies would coordinate the red green axis, talking about communist, North Korea, communist China, communist Russia, and the Islamic Republic of Iran? If they all wanted to say, you know what, we're going to do it, we're taking down the great Satan, we're going to come at it, is there anything that would stop them?
Probably not. You know,
How close are we to something like that? Because we just saw a summit 6 months ago between Putin and Xi, and they expressed their BFF with one another. We know that they are funding Iran, which is funding the proxy war against Israel, which of course is our American ally. So I mean, they're already colluding a little bit. Maybe North Korea's on the outside looking in, but at least the three biggest ones. They're not. North Korea's a big part too.
yeah, no, they're
Okay.
all together. You know, they see, that's the thing. They create these fake um, what do you call them? Rogue states, rogue
Yeah.
states. So that way, you know, if something happens, you can blame the rogue state. So, say, for example, North Korea launches a missile against Los Angeles, right? Hits Los Angeles. Oh, it was just the rogue state. We're so sorry. We didn't mean it. So they take the first action or the first few actions, and then they claim that it was done independently by a rogue state. And Iran and North Korea are the two quote unquote rogue states. So if an attack comes, it will come from one of them. It won't come from Russia or China. And then, frankly, they don't want to have a nuclear exchange with us because they know that some of them would die, even though they probably may eventually win. Some of them would die. A lot of their infrastructure would be destroyed. They don't want either thing. They want us to collapse from within. That's why they have spent so much time on this asymmetric strategy. What they really want to do with the nuclear situation is create, um, is to build their strength and to undermine us to the point that our military becomes so weak that when they come to us and tell us, we're going to destroy you if you don't give the keys of the kingdom over to us, we will just do that. And we may do that if say, for example, Harris is elected, uh, that she may do that anyway because she's fighting for them. She's on their side. They are not on our side. Joe Biden has never been on our side. They are not on our side. And we should get over the notion that their policies are just stupid. Their policies are part and parcel of the manufactured crisis to destroy our country and uh, make the grounds fertile for a communist takeover, which will be led by Russia and China, um, because once the communists take over, they're the ones that want the real estate, and they're the ones with all the guns. So they're the ones who will get the real estate.
What about what about an attack on our grid?
Yeah,
Be it electrical power grids or our computer infrastructure through hacking, if they shut us down that way, our digital capabilities and our power capabilities, EMP or otherwise, that's it's not quite the same thing as launching a nuclear attack on us that would necessitate a return lobbing of missiles from us to them, but it would cripple us.
well, that may be the final. That may be the final straw. Iran has already done tests from launching high altitude missiles from the middle of the ocean on platforms that are difficult to detect. So they've already uh, uh, made rehearsals for that kind of thing. And that would be a great way to destroy our country without firing a shot, because it's estimated that within a year, about 85 to 95% of the population would be dead from starvation because, we couldn't get the food or the water that we needed, and everything would be destroyed. One of my fears in the run up to the election is that they will do something just like that to temporarily to give the Biden administration the pretext for canceling the election and then declaring martial law. So that's one of the fear. And the other fear is that some of the communist military men that are now in this country will launch strategic attacks in various cities to give them yet again the pretext for shutting down the election. I think those are one or two of the possible October surprises that the Democrat Party may launch in the event that it looks like Kamala Harris is not going to win the election.
And Jim, I want to wrap it with this one. Do we have any friends? And what I mean is,
Good question.
we're kind of listing the enemies from outside. We obviously have talked about the enemies within, which is the point of manufactured crisis. There have to be countries that say, as America goes, we go. If they crumble from without or within, it doesn't matter. It's going to have a huge impact on us. We see, even if maybe all the American people don't, we see what's happening. We see what's coming. We're going to intervene. We're going to help somehow. Do we have anybody, or are they all just kind of watching America to see what it does?
Well, many of them are in the same condition as we are, or worse. Canada is in a much worse situation. The Justin Trudeau is a Marxist, and
Yeah.
call him Castro Jr. because I really think his father was Castro. His mother was notoriously loose, and she liked going to visit Castro a lot. And but either way, it doesn't matter. He's a communist. The people who have taken over in Britain are, for the large part, the infrastructure there is very much against their own people. The German, Angela Merkel in Germany, she was an East German communist youth leader, and she infiltrated into the West and insinuated herself into the conservative party of Germany, and then rose to the top, and then opened the borders of the West to that massive migration in 2015. That was something she coordinated with Putin. And and then in French, Macron, ridiculous. We have the new leader of Argentina, who I think is great. We have the leader Bukele of El Salvador. Those countries really aren't going to come to our aid. The only other one really is Israel, and they're beset with their own problems. And if
So
we
the
were,
answer is no. We're on our own. We're on
yeah,
our own.
yeah,
Yeah. If we're going to stop this, we're going to have to do it ourselves. If it can be corrupted from within, we're going to have to stop it from within. Those of us who see it and recognize it, and we have to sound the alarm bells. Well, I know that's what you're doing with Manufactured Crisis. We'll throw that up on the screen again. The War to End America by James Simpson. It's the latest in a very, very important series of books outlining what is coming if we are not careful. And it's really too late to be careful if we are not actively fighting back against this.
active.
Um, the next time we get together to talk about something like this will be after the election, and we could be on our way to something many of us thought we would never see. So that's what this is about.
Dreadful. And it won't be simply for our children and grandchildren. It will be for us as well.
And
They,
that's true. Many of us sleep better at night thinking, well, at least I'm close to checking
yeah,
out of here. I won't be here when it all goes to hell. I'm
well,
worried about my kids and my grandkids. But you know what? The speed that we're at right now,
yeah,
maybe we won't. Maybe we'll still be here.
yeah.
Jim Simpson, author of Manufactured Crisis, The War to End America. Jim, thank you for writing it. Thank you for talking to us about it. I always appreciate the chance to chat.
Thanks, Bob. Great to be with you. Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you. All right. If you enjoyed this episode of Strictly Speaking, make sure you hit the like button wherever you're watching, if it's on YouTube or if it's on Rumble, if you're listening on Spotify. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel as well. Don't forget to hit that alarm bell, that icon, to let you know that every time we drop a new piece of content for you, you will be notified of it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.